deposits of copper. Where did they get all this wonderful copper? It's also known that these Africans were tremendous seafarers. They had things known as power canoes, in which there were 60 men manning these canoes. Then, on the other side of the United States, in California, you had a black tribe. And I will show you a drawing that was made from life, a beautiful illustration from life, of a man decked out in a kind of an Indian getup, but he's definitely not an Indian. He is a black person. What are we to make of all this? These wonderful comparisons. First of all, there is no doubt whatsoever, regardless of what the establishment archaeologists say, that there were sizable numbers of black people in the Americas, and they were not slaves blown out overseas by mistake. They actually had come here for specific economic and cultural purposes. They raised kingdoms here. Let me just quote from my notes. I don't like to normally do that, but there's so much information here. My brain is so small, I can't get all this stuff down. One of the things that's interesting is that there was a 16th century historian. His name was Peter Martyr. This was a man who was with the Spanish expeditions to Mexico. He was an eyewitness to the Spanish conquest, and in his chronicles he writes exactly what happened. And Peter Martyr, who accompanied Balboa, you know, the guy that was looking for the fountain of youth, through Florida, they actually saw native blacks in Florida in the year 1513. There was also a priest by the name of Gregorio Garcia. He said that there were blacks on an island north of Colombia, again in the 16th century, and that the people in Panama referred to a Negro king or a black king who had just recently died. Garcia's associate, his name was Bartholomew Las Cosas. He reported blacks in Florida. They even wrote down the names of these black tribes. The black tribes were known as the Jamasi of Florida, the Caribes of St. Vincent, and the Chirusas of Brazil, and they were regarded as indigenous black people. In other words, they were there before the Spanish arrived. When the Spanish arrived, they just immediately enslaved them, those that survived the diseases that were introduced by the Spaniards. So very little of what is known about them beyond these reports exists today. Now, since this information has come out, there has been great strides made in DNA. You're all familiar with the O.J. Simpson trial, how they can get blood types down. And in this DNA research, anthropologists, archaeologists, using computers, have been able to trace the different races that inhabited the Americas before the Spaniards arrived. One of the groups they've traced definitely are Mongoloid, that came across the Bering Straits. Now, these terms that I'm using have no social bearing. So when I say Negro or Negroid, it's the same I'm using Caucasoid or Mongoloid. These are scientific terms to identify people. I'm not talking in social terms. The people that came across the Bering Straits, we know about, okay, were Mongoloid. Definitely became the Indians and so on. At least two black strains, pre-Columbian they call them, before Columbus here, existed in America. One of those strains, those black strains, is unequivocally traced back to West Africa. This is revealed in some of the sculpture, the Olmec sculpture, which shows some of the blacks with a peripheral ridge, barely perceptible, a peripheral ridge around the lips. That is traced to a genetic type found in Ghana. It shows you also how excellent the artist was in portraying a real-life person. However, there is another black group, a pre-Columbian black group in the Americas, mostly along the west coast, California, what is now Acapulco, of a black group of people who do not trace their ancestry to Africa. No one can understand where these people have come from. None of them survive anymore. They do not exist. They have been either bred out of existence or they were the victims of disease or whatever. However, with this new DNA testing, which is now, in other words, all the DNA of every group in the world is now fed into a computer. A computer then can make correspondences, comparisons between every other group. This black group, which they found traces of in the Americas, matches, strangely enough, with Micronesia on the other side of the Pacific, to a people called the Negritos. These are black people who trace their origins not east from Africa, but westwards across the Pacific. Now that leaves a tremendous problem. How is it possible that these negritos, or their ancestors, could have